Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to paint a watercolor fall oak leaf. Autumn is such a beautiful time of year. I always get inspired to paint leaves, so if you'd like to learn how to paint one, then keep on watching. I started off by wetting the paper with a nice clean wet wash. This is going to be for our wet and wet wash. So I'm now dropping in the color. I've mixed up a few different browns. I've got a reddish brown, a gray brown, and then a medium brown. You can use whatever colors you have on hand. I like brown madder, Payne's gray, and burnt sienna. And so what I'm doing is just dropping those three colors in while the paper is still wet. And I'm focusing on getting the edges colored first, because those will be the areas that the wet wash dries up on first, and you do want to have the color all dropped in before the paper dries so it can blend really nicely. And I'm using Arches 140-pound cold pressed paper today. This is really nice paper. Sometimes I use less expensive paper. But for this project, because the leaves really do look better when the colors blend nicely, I would recommend using Arches if you can afford it. And I've just dropped in some color, but you can see I've also left a lot of the paper showing through. This is intentional. You do want to have a lot of the light of the paper showing through for your final leaf. So what I've done is drawn a little bit of a line down the center to indicate the midrib, and now I'm going over the tips of the leaves with more paint of the three colors, and I'm not really following a reference photo to paint a leaf exactly. I'm just indicating how the leaf would look and the colors that I see in fall right now. So I've just added the bit of a stem, and now I'm dropping in a little bit more color, adding some splotches in the middle areas, and I'm not painting it on, I'm really just dropping the color in and letting it do its own thing on the paper. That's really important. That's how you'll get the beautiful, smooth, glowing look. And that is why I recommend the Arches paper for this project. So as I'm going along here, the paper might be starting to dry up a little bit. I'm using a round number 6 sable brush with a nice fine point, and so I'm just going on the little edges of the tips of the oak leaf now and making sure that they come to a nice fine point. So I'm just tidying up those edges. Now I'm just taking a moment and looking at how the color is blending, deciding if I need to put more in. So I'm adding a little bit more of the darker brown to the middle. And you do want to add a fair amount of dark color on this first wash. The way I paint is usually trying to just do 3 layers. So this is layer number 1. And I want to get quite a lot of color in the areas that I would like the pigment to be right away. Because when the paint dries, it's going to dry a bit lighter, and the less we can fiddle around with the painting, the better it is going to look. So if you can do it in 3 layers and get all that major coloring and pigment in on the first wash, it'll be easier for you in the long run. I've let layer 1 completely dry. I used a blow dryer to make sure it was completely dry. And layer 2 is going to be the veins. And you can see I had a little scrap piece of paper there, and now I'm using a smaller brush, a number 1 round sable. This is a Winsor & Newton brand, I believe. And I've actually loaded my brush up with the darker gray, and then I just sort of drew a few lines on that scrap piece of paper first to get any extra wet paint off, and sort of paint enough of that off until I get a nice fine line. So I'd recommend trying that on the scrap piece of paper before starting the veins on the leaf. That way you can get really fine, delicate lines. And now I'm just going down the edges, and I did do a line down the center as well. So start with the center vein, which is the midrib, and then do the secondary veins off the side. And one of those little veins usually matches up with one of the points of the leaves. You don't have to be exact if you don't want to. If you are looking to do it more detailed, you could even look at a picture or a real oak leaf to see how the veins are laid out. I wouldn't suggest adding every vein you see. We're just doing this to indicate and represent the look of an oak leaf, but not be scientifically accurate. So just enough to indicate that there's some veins and create some form and shape. So I've loaded my brush up again because I was running out of paint, and I just used my handy scrap piece of paper there again to dry off the brush a little bit so I get a nice fine line. And I'm also trying to make sure as I paint that I have my brush really upright and I'm using really light pressure. And this will give you a much finer line. And it's kind of challenging to do this on camera without having two camera angles to show you without my hand blocking a little bit, but you can kind of get the idea. And now I'm making those veins go even over the areas where the paper is still white, and this is where the beautiful layering effect starts to happen. And this is something you can only achieve with watercolor. Now I have all the veins mapped in, and I'm just loading my brush up again, and as you can see I also dab my brush on a paper towel. So load the brush and then always dab the brush on the paper towel to get any blobs or loose paint off. And then go back to your fine detailing. I'm just adding a little bit more to the outline of the bit of the leaf stem where it would have attached to the branch. Now I've just zoomed in a little bit more so you can see the fine detailing. And after the veins are placed in, I start on my third layer. By the time I'm finished the veins, they're already dry because it's not very wet paint and they're so tiny. And the third layer of paint is just defining and adding a bit more depth. And so I do this with wet on dry. So I'm taking wet paint from the paint palette and I'm going to add it to the corners and areas of the leaf where there might be a little bit of shadow or the lobes joined together. And this is just going to create more depth, more detail. And the trick here is to make sure you're using a small brush. So I paint on the wet paint onto the dry paper, and then I rinse out my brush and I blend out the edge a little bit, and I do that by sort of catching the edge and then stippling it out a bit. And you might want to try this if you haven't done this before on a scrap piece of paper. So I've just kind of blended the edge, and then you can see I'm making a little stippling movement, and you'll have some fine little marks and textures from that stippling movement, but this is what we want. It will create more of a realistic looking leaf. So I'm going around and I'm kind of just getting into all those corners. If you're a beginner, I'd suggest just doing one area at a time and blending it and stippling it. I've done a few all at once, but I'm fairly confident with this and can blend them all before they dry. Now you can see that the leaf is starting to have a little bit more shape. It doesn't look as flat anymore. Each time I grab that extra paint, I've zoomed in here so you can't see, but I am dabbing my brush on the paper towel, and then I kind of give the brush a little bit of a twirl so that the point of my brush goes to a fine tip. Now I've added a little bit over the midrib here of a lighter wash of paint, and then I'm stippling and blending out with the clean damp brush. So we'll work our way all around the leaf, getting all these corners in. And I quite like this part of the project. It's really relaxing. You already have all the color mapped in and you're just going around and adding those final details. Now you could also try this project with different colors if you don't have the colors I used at the beginning. If you wanted to do like a leaf like this but use some yellows and greens, you could try that instead, or reds and orange, that would work too. And sometimes some fall leaves are part red and part green, and this is a really beautiful mix, though this is harder to paint because red and green mix into a brown and it can get muddy. So if you're a beginner, I would suggest using all browns or yellows and greens, something that when they mix it's visually bright and you get a nice color out of it. So I'm just working my way around the last part here, adding that wet on dry definition. If you try this project out, I would love to see how it turned out, and you could share it on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, I'd love it if you tagged me in your post. You could tag @LauraAshtonArtist, and then I'll see your post, and I'd love to even share it in my stories. Okay, so we're nearing the end now. You can see that the leaf is a little bit more dimensional. Now I'm taking a light dilute wash of the reddish brown and just stippling it into the center over the midrib. And I'm sort of stippling a little bit and then rinsing my brush and blending it out a little bit as well. So that's pretty much it. You can just adjust the final detail as much as you want, and then you're done. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to my channel for a new tutorial every Wednesday. Just hit the bell icon to get the notification, and I will see you in the next video. See you next week.